pray for times like this. Oh my God.
This is some real gold here. In fact, Denims, Frogan, Denims, Frogan, and Casey Tron. You guys should pay me for this. You guys should send me right now a super thanks for this. You owe me super thanks for this.
Okay.
I want to see it on this video.
Okay.
You better leave a super thanks, all of you, on this video, because I'm giving you some free advice here. Non-legal, legal advice. Non-legal. Because I'm not their personal lawyer. So, but here's what they would do. Here's what I would do. What I would do is this. I would say, as a settlement lawyer, because Ethan does not have to settle. He can say no. But I will say this, and here's how you do it. Here's how we do it, guys. Here's how we do it, chat. You say, I'm going to rat out, like a jailhouse snitch, I'm going to rat out the people that called CPS, and I'm going to give you their names and all their information.
Oh, jeez. Oh, wow. Oh, God. Woo!
So you can pursue them, because you really want them, right?
Yeah.
You really want them. We're going to give up their heads. We're going to sacrifice them to the corn. We're going to put them out there in the wood chipper.
Yes.
If you drop this against us, we'll do that for you privately. So no one sees it. It's going to be private, off the books. We're going to slide their heads to you, but you got to drop it against us. And I think that's the real sauce. And I think
I'm going to be honest. I don't think they know who did it. I don't think they can do this. Oh, gee.
I'm not their personal lawyer. So, but super thanks for this. You owe me.
I used to pray for times like this. Oh my God.
This is some real gold here. In fact, Denims, Frogan, Denims, Frogan, and Casey Tron. You guys should pay me for this. You guys should send me right now a super thanks for this. You owe me super thanks for this.
Okay.
I want to see it on this video.
Okay.
You better leave a super thanks, all of you, on this video, because I'm giving you some free advice here. Non-legal, legal advice. Non-legal. Because I'm not their personal lawyer. So, but here's what they would do. Here's what I would do. What I would do is this. I would say, as a settlement lawyer, because Ethan does not have to settle. He can say no. But I will say this, and here's how you do it. Here's how we do it, guys. Here's how we do it, chat. You say, I'm going to rat out, like a jailhouse snitch, I'm going to rat out the people that called CPS, and I'm going to give you their names and all their information.
Oh, jeez.
This is over.
Oh, wow. Oh, God. Woo!
So you can pursue them, because you really want them, right?
Yeah.
You really want them. We're going to give up their heads. We're going to sacrifice them to the corn. We're going to put them out there in the wood chipper.
Yes.
If you drop this against us, we'll do that for you privately. So no one sees it. It's going to be private, off the books. We're going to slide their heads to you, but you got to drop it against us. And I think that's the real sauce. And I think
I'm going to be honest. I don't think they know who did it. I don't think they can do this. Like, obviously, this is absolute cinema. But if I'm looking at this logistically, they probably don't even know who did it. That's the point.
I think that they might actually want to settle if they did that. It's a sauce. Don't tell anybody. I know there's 9,000 of you in here right now, but we're not going to tell anybody. We're not going to go anywhere on the internet and send that. We're not going to. That's not going to get clipped out by anybody, right? Nobody's going to clip that.
Nobody's
going to react to that. Nobody's going to say anything about that, right? That's going to be our secret, right? Just us in this chat, right? We're not going to talk about it. We're not going to post it on Reddit. We're not going to put it on Discord. We're not going to put it in Twitter. It's going to be. There's no way that's clipped. There's no way this gets clipped. It's impossible. Clippers don't do that at all.
Of course not. No, imagine that. And so, who's gonna? What's going to be CPS called? No, I don't think that they know who did it. I actually think that Denims and Frogan and whatever the Casey Tron, I don't think that they even know who did it, period. They have no idea. And so, like, all they did is create the environment for it to happen. I don't think that they know the people. I don't think they coordinated with the people. And here's the other part. Here's the funny thing. He's leaving this out. Is that if they know who did it, calling and weaponizing a governmental agency on another person is, as far as I know, a criminal offense. It's kind of like in the same spectrum of swatting, and he can correct me if I'm wrong about this. But if they know who did it, and they coordinated with that person, not only would they be doing that and getting away from this lawsuit, but they would be opening themselves up to somehow a sort of accessory lawsuit or accessory charge for weaponizing a federal agency and submitting false reports. So this actually, like, aiding and abetting, right? So actually this could be even worse for them if they did this. Please let them do this. That would be really fucking funny, man. And they'll only find out if they go to Discovery. Yeah, exactly, right? And we'll see what happens, but submitting false reports, yes, that would obviously be in the deal. I don't know if that would be in the deal or not. I mean, because this is a civil case. I mean, usually you can't plead away guilt from a criminal case through a civil case, as far as I know. I mean, I don't think that's the way it works. I could be wrong, but, like, that's just what I think. They'd get amnesty? I don't think they would. False report would be very hard to prove, but Ethan would definitely fight it in court. Yeah. Well, I don't think it would be hard to prove, because these people probably have private communications that completely explain that they were doing it maliciously. Like, just in total plain English, that they were doing it maliciously. And so that's what I would expect, right? I could be wrong about that, but I don't think that I am. So in my opinion, I think this would be a very, very cut and dried case. Denham said that she will never settle. Well, good for her. You know, hopefully that goes really well for her. Hopefully things go great. But I did see this. This is, I think that he made another post actually talking about Tectone. Let me see if I can show this real quick and find it. Where is it? Yeah, it's right here. Legal Mindset offers Tectone help in finding a lawyer against Denhams. DM me, bro. We can get you a defamation lawyer.
F23 says Tectone said he wants to sue Denhams for defamation, but couldn't find lawyers to follow through. Why is that? He's not looking hard enough. If Techie wants help, I'll help Techie. If Techie wants to hit me up, Techie, DM me, bro. I'll find you a lawyer. We can get you a defamation lawyer. If Tectone needs help, Tectone, call me. Maybe. You know, call me maybe. F23 says Tectone said he wants to.
Man, he DM'd him? Yes, I saw this. And so, yeah, things are heating up pretty fast, right? And I think I got a pretty good one yesterday, smiley face, but I DM'd him anyways since he was cool. Gentlemen, I used to pray for times like this. Oh my God. The greatest Twitch era? Yep, there it is. This is insane. Oh my fucking God, man. And we're gonna get some good content, boys. Yes, we are. And this is gonna be fucking insane. I cannot wait to see this. And then, oh yeah, oh, here's another one too. Listen to this. Bro, Baldy hits her with a reality check. Look at that. What?
Out right now, but tell Ethan I will debate him.
I'll debate him? She's gonna debate him.
You can debate him. You can debate him in a court of law. So you want to debate Ethan Klein? You have your opportunity. You have your opportunity. There's a moderator to the debate. It's called a federal judge. Good luck.
Oh, I love this, man. This is one of my favorite things to see happen. This is absolutely fucking amazing. I am so happy to see this. Oh my fucking God. This is the best content influence since Step vs. Third. It will be if it goes to trial. Yeah, here we go. We've had so many updates to this story. It's amazing.
Finally, on the Ethan lawsuit stuff, just to reiterate with all of you, I will be fighting this lawsuit.
Yes.
I have legal counsel. They are actively working towards drafting some stuff. I can't really share more than that right now, but I can't really share strategy right now. But they are
$33,000 raised for the IDF.
Working tirelessly for this case, and I can assure all of you that all of this is going to directly fund the paperwork, the documents that are currently being worked on that will be filed, and I'm very excited to once it is filed and once it's public to share it with you guys. So yes, very excited.
I can't wait. I am so excited.
We'll be working.
I'm so excited. I cannot wait to see this. This is going to be amazing. And yeah, this is great. Something I saw on my wife is to watch them a lot. Funny how low cut her shirts became whenever she's money. Well, I don't know about that. I try not to comment on women's appearances. There's no real reason for me to do that. I don't think I need to, honestly. So I saw something that was really, really funny. This is from 1 year ago.
Hasn't led directly to the death of one of his parents yet, so he has that going for him over Asmund at least. I'll admit, I did like that tweet, and I have a lack of respect for Asmund Gold after letting his mom with COPD live in those sort of conditions. I'm sorry. Like, you're a millionaire, you have all of the resources in the world. Why is your sick mother living like that? Like, I'll say it, I don't care. If that makes me a bad person, still miles above of Asmund Gold. Miles above Asmund Gold.
Now, I'm going to be honest. I do genuinely believe that bad things do happen to bad people. And so whenever I see somebody saying this, I think it's just a matter of time. And whenever it inevitably happens, I will be there to laugh. And I think that many people will.
Welcome back, guys. Thank you for tuning in. We've got...
Wow. Wow. I don't even know what to say. Promises kept.
Oh, guys, thank you for tuning in. We've got
Oh. Wow. Wow. I don't even know what to say. Promises kept. I said it would happen. I hate how people actually bully you. That's okay. I get my time. That's fine. And check your new editors. Did about this on Clip, so I didn't see this at all before. But this was wild. This is actually wild. Things do happen to bad. Be honest. I do genuinely believe that bad things do happen to bad people. And so whenever I see somebody saying this, I think it's just a matter of time. And whenever it inevitably happens, I will be there to laugh. I think that many people will. Oh,
welcome back, guys. Thank you for tuning in. We've got.
And so anyway, watch your short. I don't know if there's a short about this or not. I have no idea. And so I said it was going to happen. I told her it was going to happen. And here we are. Here we are, guys. Getting sued. Is it a bad thing? Yeah, Snark subreddits after Emerald. Oh, I'm sure they're going to attack anybody they can. I mean, they're just bullies. The first one. Let's see if I can find this. Somehow it's got even worse for him. Oh no, this is just, yeah, we already saw this before. It's not a big deal. And yeah, I don't even know. Is it on Asmongold Shorts? I mean, I don't even know what YouTube channels I have anymore, guys. I'm sorry to say. What is this? If I can find it. What the fuck is this? Shorts? No, I have no idea where this is at all. But apparently these are getting a lot of views. A lot of people are watching these. And anyway, so who the fuck knows? Anyway, so I did call this. I called it a year ago. I said this was going to happen to you. And at that time, I said I would be there to laugh at you and celebrate your downfall. And here we are, a year later. Wow. Wow. How about that? She didn't listen. She should have listened. She should have listened. I said it was going to happen. It only took 1 year. That was quick. It always is. And sweet, beautiful vindication. I know. It's amazing, isn't it? And this is making me believe in God. I can see why you say that. Absolutely. And karma's a bitch. Yeah, you're usually right. Well, no, the thing is that this must feel so good for you. No. Because I know how bad it's going to get for her, and it hasn't even begun. We haven't even talked about the follow-up defamation lawsuits that I think are coming. We haven't even talked about the fact that if she actually gets convicted guilty of these, it will give Twitch the ability to ban her account because she used Twitch as a vehicle to commit a crime. No. This is only step one in like a 10-step process, okay, guys? It's going to get better and better and better. And the whole way through, I'm going to be watching. I'll be watching. But anyway, so this is another person who's trying to advocate for getting me deplatformed and getting banned because he thinks that I'm bullying Caseytron by saying that I don't feel sorry for her, that she's getting sued for from Ethan, right? Basically, right? This is the reply, so I don't know exactly where it is. And so this is Mike from PA. This is the same exact guy. He's absolutely having a breakdown. If we keep pushing, the problem will solve itself. Gentlemen, I want to let you guys know that I am going to do my best. I'm going to try as well as I can, and we're gonna take care of this problem, okay? I don't know. I can't guarantee results, but I can guarantee effort. It might not happen immediately. It might not happen instantly. You need to make a post for this? Yes. And we're going to try to get rid of these people and get the fuck out of Twitter. Yes, exactly. So I'm thinking about, you know, a lot of these people are accusing me of weaponizing my community. I'm thinking about proving them right. Maybe I should do that, and then we'll see what happens. I don't know, but if you want to act like a victim and you want to post stuff like this, maybe I'll make you deserve it. I'm not saying I'll do it. I'm just saying I might. So the thing is, I see these people, and I want to show this, and the reason why I show this here is because these people are prime bullies. They are bullies. They are aggressive. They are sociopathic. They are awful people. They have no values. They don't care about anything other than making people do what they want. And that's it. Don't go down to their level. I won't. I'll go lower. I have no... See, the thing is that...
never changed you. God bless
when
you.
I see stuff like this, my goal is to find some sort of way to get people like this off the platform. This is a person who is openly, plainly, statedly talking about having somebody kill themselves. Openly advocating for it. That's it. And so that's it. If people want to take the low road, I'll meet them there. That's fine with me. And so, careful with words, though? Oh, I'm always careful with my words. I never say anything that would get me in trouble. All I'm saying is that I think these people need to be held accountable for advocating and promoting making somebody want to kill themselves. They need to be stopped? Yeah. We need to stop these people. We got to get rid of these people, guys. It's not about killing yourself? Yeah, of course it is. Of course it's about killing yourself. So I just want you guys to see that whenever these parasites are pleading for any sort of relief or any sort of, mercy at all, this is what they do. These people do not want mercy. All they want is they want to be able to control aggression. That's it. You want it to mean the bad thing because it makes you right? Gentlemen, there is no amount of emotional manipulation or gaslighting or anything like that that's going to make me even doubt myself for a second. I understand that this might work with dumb people or anybody else who's trying to look like a good person or anything like that. I don't need to do that. This is not like that's not the way that I operate. So you're not going to try to, you can't misinterpret the tweet. Yes. I don't, you're not like any form of gaslighting like that to me. Just is it, you're literally just wasting your time. You're just wasting your time and that's it. And so don't fuck me. Yeah, I don't. You know, he's right because he is right. Yeah, you're not going to even make me question myself for a second. The more that these people push, the more that we will push back. And I also want to say that, I'm pretty good at doing it. And so I think that these people should take the L, take some self-reflection, ask yourself, is this a good thing to collectively bully and lie for people? And, maybe change their behavior. Let them find out. If they weren't dumb fucks, they'd settle and apologize already. Yeah, well, either way, I want to say that there's never going to be a point where I will ever give these people even a slight amount of sympathy or any level of relief. It doesn't matter what you do. Even if you apologize, I will keep going. Because I know that the only reason why these people would apologize is to somehow avoid accountability and then rebuild themselves and then do the same thing again. Nope, that's it.
God bless you, Osman, you beautiful bastard. Oh boy. But that is incredible. People want to go that route. Thankfully, Asmund seems to have the power to make them be accountable for their bullshit. The problem is that rarely people are actually able to make others accountable. God bless Asmund. So far, he seems to have a good head up on his shoulders. I think that's one of the reasons why people follow him, which I find perfectly fine. Oh shit, I might lose this. I wonder. He is not dead. I knew it, sadly. Now he's dead.
Have any friends, and that goes for all of you too. If it's all about you, good luck with your marriage. If it's all about you, you don't have friends. You might have, if you're a bully in particular, you might have, you know, toadies and thugs who benefit from your use of power, but you don't have friends. If you exploit your customers as a business person repeatedly to redound to your own immediate advantage, you're not going to have customers for very long. Your reputation is going to precede you. You're not going to do well in the world. So what do you do instead? Power is a bad story. It's a corrupt way of looking at the world. It leads to violence. It's generally manifested in service to a narrow kind of hedonism, because why have power unless it's to get exactly what the hell the worst of you wants from moment to moment? If you're not under the sway of some self-centered and relatively malevolent whim, you don't need to use power on other people, because you could just ask them to go along for the journey. And maybe they would. That's what you do when you play instead of when you use force. That's what you do when you invite instead of using force. That's what you do when you establish a vision that other people share instead of being a tyrant. Well, that's what you do if you're mature. That's even what 2-year-olds understand by the time they're 3, when they start engaging in pretend play with a would-be friend. Who's a friend to a 2-year-old? Well, the first thing, or 3-year-old, because 3-year-olds start to become social. Well, the first thing you want to do if you're a 3-year-old is play a game with someone. That's not the same as having your own game, right? If you play a game with someone else, there are some intrinsic rules. Well, what are the rules? Well, how about they get a turn, right? And maybe a generous turn, right? Because if you're going to have a friend, and you want the friend to like you, which is kind of like the definition of a friend, and someone who likes you would like to see you again, and that continuity of the desire to see you again and to play together, that's the definition of friendship. It's a sequence of games played with the same person. The game has to be voluntary, it has to be invitational, it has to be reciprocal, right? And so what you're trying to do with your 2-year-old is you're getting them to sacrifice the immediate gratification of their instincts to reciprocity, right? Now you do something that's a bit more sophisticated than that too, because the other thing you do with children and yourself and with people you love, if you're the least bit sensible, is you let them know that they shouldn't conduct themselves in a manner in the immediate present that compromises their future, right? That's what you mean when you tell your child, don't do stupid things. Well, what's a stupid thing, generally speaking? Something interesting and entertaining in the moment that you pay for, right? And that's the same as an impulsive bad habit in adulthood. It's like the definition of a bad habit. A bad habit is something that works now and not so good tomorrow, or next week, or next month, or next year, or 5 years from now, or 10 years from now. That implies as well that just as the child establishes a relationship of reciprocity with the friend, by starting to understand the future, they establish a reciprocal relationship with their future self. And that's the same thing. So what maturation is, we all know this, maturation is the ability, let's say, to share and to forego gratification, to delay gratification. What does it mean to delay gratification? It means you don't get what the hell you want right now all the time. You have to conduct yourself in a manner that assures communal stability, let's say, and reciprocity. And in the enjoyable sense, you want to be surrounded by friends and compatriots and people who move you forward and people who wish you well.
I wonder, what does the doctor thinks when people are actually openly antagonistic from a young age? Having a conversation with him would be wonderful.
Because that's going to be a lot better for you than the alternative. And you want to do that in a manner that assures the future. The whole higher cortical apparatus that human beings are blessed and cursed with is there to integrate the possessing spirits that might otherwise be impulsive and fractionating, to integrate them into a personality that can act reciprocally in relationship to others and guide itself as a consequence of apprehension of the future. It's a definition of maturity. Now, you kind of know this because as your children mature, as you've matured, the amount of time you can consider expands, right? For the 13-year-old, for a 4-year-old sitting down to take piano lessons, half an hour is an eternity, right? For a 13-year-old, 6 months into the future is forever. By the time you're 50, a year is like a week. Right? Well, and there's a loss in that to some degree, but there's a huge gain because as you develop, your capacity to apprehend the consequences of your actions across broader spans of time is much improved, and that reflects cortical maturation. And the same thing happens with regards to your ability to manage yourself socially. What does it mean to manage yourself socially? Well, it means, as I said, that it's not all about you. Your aim can't be the immediate gratification of the whims that possess you. If you're married, if you have a wife or husband, is your wife or husband, how do they stand in relationship to their importance in relationship to you? Well, we could just think about it in a sort of clear-headed manner. Let's say you have a scrap with your wife, you have a fight with your wife, a disagreement, and you win. You win. She's wrong. She's punished for it, whatever way you can manage.
What the fuck?
What's the problem with that?
Dude, that was
You're
amazing.
right, she's wrong. Well, let's say you do that 50 times.
Shit.
Well, now you're living with someone who's You always defeat. And so now you're living with someone who's defeated. And what's the problem with that? Well, they're around. Right, and so maybe that's the problem with attaining a manipulated victory over your marital partner. Fine if it's a one-off, but you know they're there when you wake up in the morning. And so is the consequence of your, what, self-centered, power-based maneuvering? Right, and maybe you're a victorious tyrant and she's a defeated slave. Well, that's not much of a victory there, buddy. Right, and the same applies to any reciprocal social relationship. You know, if you have any sense, if you think it through, you want to build up the people that are around you. Well, why? Well, because they're around you. And so if you made generous offerings to the social world and you improved the nexus of relationships that you were involved in, why wouldn't that be good for you? Now, you might think, well, there's only so much to go around, and if everyone else wins, I lose. But that's another story, and it's the story of power. And it's a very bad story, and it's not true. Because the truth of the matter is that there's more than enough for everyone to do, and your victory doesn't have to ever come at the cost of someone else's defeat. I shouldn't say ever. I mean, there are times when, you know, people are head-to-head, and the game that's being played isn't fair, and it's your victory or your defeat. But those are very pathological and unnecessary circumstances, and it would be better to do everything you can to ever avoid being in a situation like that. Situations like that arise when your relationships have deteriorated radically. And I would say as well, the same thing applies to the story of power. Power is the manner in which social relationships, or even your relationship with yourself, it's the story that makes itself manifest when the proper story collapses. Right? It's the degeneration of a state that turns it into a tyranny. It's not the victory of a state. And it's the same at every level of social relationship. If you're tyrannizing yourself, that's a failure. If you're tyrannizing your wife, that's a failure. The same with your children, the same with your friends. It's not an optimized pattern of being. It's not about you. It's not about the whims that narrowly possess you. That's a more accurate formulation. So what does that imply? If it's not about you, it means you have to give up something to be social and to mature, right? What do you have to give up? You have to give up what the 2-year-old gives up. You have to give up getting what the hell you want, the second you want it, all the time, no matter what. So what are you giving up? You're giving up the momentary whims that possess you that you could identify with. You're giving up your wants. Maybe you're giving up your needs. What does it mean to give them up? I said it means the other person gets a turn. It means that the future is taken into account. What does that imply? It implies that you made a sacrifice. Okay, so here's something to think about, and it'll guide us through the rest of the talk. The basis of maturity and community is sacrifice. Okay, now it has to be that way. You understand? Like, this isn't an arbitrary proposition. We're communal beings, and we're future-oriented. So because we're future-oriented, we have to give up the present, right? Because we have to bring out the present. We cannot sacrifice the future to the present. That's why you can't do impulsive, stupid, terribly interesting, and entertaining things. People drink so that they can fool themselves into thinking that's okay. And it is. It's a blast while it's happening, but the next day tends to be a rather dismal affair, especially if you've seriously gone overboard, let's say. And the reason for that is that it's too easy to sacrifice the future to the impulsive pleasures of the moment. And you know, as a self-conscious being, that you're going to have to bear the consequences of your actions as they propagate across time. And then it's the same with the others that you come into contact with. Because you're communal, because you're social, that's the human mode of being, you have to give up the fact that it's all about the local and narrow, present-centered you. That's the sacrifice. So what does that mean? Community is predicated on sacrifice. All right, so that implies that the central story of mankind is one of sacrifice. Okay, so now if you know that, you've got a fundamental key to understanding the fundamental stories of our culture, the biblical stories, because the biblical library is an examination of sacrifice. Okay, so now we're going to expand on that. I want to make it very clear so that it's perfectly understandable. We'll start with the story of Adam and Eve. So Adam and Eve are the archetypal father and mother of us all. You could think about them as the pattern of masculinity and femininity as such. It's something like that, speaking metaphorically. So how is that to be understood? Okay, imagine a movie again.
When my sleep was off, it felt like I couldn't show up as my best self. I spent night after night proud just to get up, work.
You know perfectly well that when you go see a movie, you don't just see a video camera following someone around for 2 hours of their life, right? You don't see them wake up, and you don't watch them blink, and you don't watch them make their bed. You don't watch them go through the mundane things that make up day-to-day life. You're not interested in that. You're interested in an abstraction of their mode of being. You want the author, the writer, to present you with the drama of their life. You want the character that's being portrayed to be an abstraction of those elements of human aim and motivation that capture your interest, right? So a fictional account is a distillation, right? Which means that fiction, modern people, because we think that stories are entertainment, we think that fiction is the opposite of fact. And that's a foolish thing to think. We know it's foolish because we know that works of great literature are true. Right? We know that Crime and Punishment is true. We know that The Brothers Karamazov or War and Peace is true. Well, it's fictional. It never happened. So how can it be true? And the answer is, well, it's a distillation of what's true. right? A character like Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment, a character like the Joker in The Dark Knight, is a distillation of everything that's pathological, right, into one character. Now, is that real? Well, it's not real in that it is a videotaped representation of an actual sequence of events. It's real in that it's a profound abstraction. And you might say, well, abstractions aren't real. It's like, really? Words are abstractions. Are they real? How about numbers? Numbers are abstractions. There's lots of mathematicians who think that numbers are the most real thing. Well, what does that mean? Well, if you're a master of numbers, you master the world. So how is that not real? How is an abstraction and a distillation not real? Fiction isn't the opposite of fact. Fiction is hyper-real. And the deeper the fiction, so to speak, the deeper the distillation, the more real it is. And literature, great literature in particular, is very deep, but mythology, religious accounts, religious stories are the deepest form of abstraction. So they're the most true. Now, they're the most true. How does it mean that they help you specify your aim better than anything else? There's a definition of true, like an arrow flying true, right? Something that strikes right to the heart. You get your story straight, you see the world in a true manner, right? Adam and Eve are the distillation of what it means to be human. That's a good way of thinking about it. Adam, for example, is charged by God with the task of naming and subduing the world. What is that a reference to? The masculine proclivity to set things in a determinate order. That's the, what would you say, impetus towards the patriarchal hierarchy, right? Even the feminists admit that the social order is a masculine construct. Well, that's Adam's task. God charges him with that after his creation, to subdue and name the world. What does it mean to subdue? It means to give everything its proper due, to put everything in its proper place, in the appropriate story. That's the right way to think about it. To give everything its name, to specify the things of the world in a manner that allows, in Genesis 1, the garden to be shepherded and stewarded properly. That's Adam's job. What's Eve's job? Well, it's an equal job. That's why she's taken from Adam's rib. It's an equal job. The word Eve means, in Hebrew, is ezer kenegdo. What does that mean? It means something like, I have to hit it from multiple perspectives to get it right. It means something like martial partner in challenging play. Martial in the military sense. Ezer means military ally. That's one of its connotations, right? So it's a relationship of strength. It's a relationship of challenge. What's optimized challenge? How would you define optimized challenge? Think about it this way. Imagine you want to play one-on-one basketball and you want to win. Okay, so you're 6'5" and you have a nephew and he's like 6 and he's, 4 feet tall. And you think, he'll be a good partner because why? Well, if I play one-on-one basketball with him, I'm going to win. And of course, you want to be a winner, so why not be 6'5" and stomp the hell out of your nephew when you're playing one-on-one basketball? And you might say, well, that's not any fun. And then I might say, well, you're trying to win and it's pretty much assured. And you say, well, maybe I don't want an assured victory. And that's why you get married. I'm dead serious about that. I'm dead serious about that. You could imagine this. Imagine that's love. Imagine love as an instinct. Okay, now you could imagine love as a divine gift of grace. It doesn't matter to me which of those two perspectives you adopt. Imagine love as an instinct. Well, what's the instinct? It's the instinct to set yourself up with optimized challenge. Why? So you grow. So your eye falls on someone and love emerges, right? It's a calling to you. It's not something you create. It's something that appears to you. What's the estimate that your instinct to love is attempting? I can spar with this person in a manner that will make both of us grow. That's what the love signifies, right? And it's, as I said, you can think about it as an instinct. You can think about it as a divine act of grace. The two things converge. It makes no difference to me whether it's a bottom-up phenomena or a top-down phenomena. What does it mean to enjoy being with someone in the deepest sense? You want a partner in play who's matched with you, right? You don't want to be the 6'5" bully who's winning every game because his opponent is not capable of pushing him or her to the limits of their ability. Well, why do you want to be pushed to the limit of your ability? So you improve. Well, why improve? Well, what's the alternative? A dull stasis? A dull, meaningless stasis? Or a degeneration? Insofar as pain and anxiety are real, and hopelessness as well, those seem like unacceptable alternatives. It's certainly not what you want for your children or for anyone you love. What you'd hope for them is that they find an occupation, they find an educational pathway, they find a partner that puts them on the edge of their development so they can dance on the edge, so that they can continue to unfold, so that they can be better for themselves, so they can be better for the future, and so they can be better for everyone else. And maybe that optimized challenge that love indexes is the voice of the spirit that calls you to that continued pattern of adaptation. That's Eve, partnered with Adam. What's Eve's role? Well, we kind of know what the female role is. We can speak biologically again, the feminine role. Women are more sensitive to negative emotion on average than men. That's cross-culturally validated finding. It's very well established. It goes along with the increased female propensity for depression and anxiety. Men have their problems, don't get me wrong. They're much more likely to be antisocial. There's all sorts of sex-typed pathologies. I'm not trying to single women out, not in the least. There's no reason to assume that ability and proclivity for catastrophe are anything but equally distributed between the two sexes, right? We, speaking biologically, we co-evolved. There's no reason to assume that the relationship isn't one of radical equality, for better or worse. Women are also more agreeable. What does that mean? They're more instinctively empathic. Well, why would women be more sensitive to negative emotion and more instinctively empathic? Well, let's start with negative emotion. Boys and girls don't differ much in their general patterns of negative emotion. The differences emerge at puberty. Well, why would women become more sensitive to negative emotion at puberty? Well, see if you can figure it out. Well, here's a couple of reasons. Sexual dimorphism in strength emerges more profoundly at puberty. So men have much more upper body strength. They're more capable of physical domination in dispute. Women are very good at long distance endurance sports. They're very resilient, but as fighters, they lose. So what does that imply in terms of sensitivity to threat? Well, the world's a more dangerous place for women. Why else? Well, they're sexually vulnerable in a way that men aren't. And that makes itself present, obviously, at puberty. Why are they more sexually vulnerable? Here's the definition of a woman. I don't know if that's what you came here for tonight. You know the Matt Walsh movie, What is a Woman? Well, I'll tell you. We know the answer to that. It isn't chromosomal, even biologically. Now, chromosome differentiation is a very powerful marker of sex, but it's not the fundamental distinction. The fundamental biological distinction between male and female is quite clear. Females are the sex that contribute more to reproduction. So, for example, the egg is 10 million times the volume of the sperm. And so right at that level, the initial level of conception, the female is already making the larger sacrifice. So there's a definition of a woman. A woman is the sex who makes the larger sacrifice for reproduction. Now, you have to be a fool to dispute that, obviously. Women carry babies, like they're pregnant, and they take primary responsibility for infants when they're in their most dependent state. That puts them at a disadvantage socioeconomically. It's difficult, differentially difficult for women to maneuver in the world when they're pregnant or when they have dependent infants. So what does that mean with regards to mate choice? It means that they look for men who are capable of keeping the predators who might prey on infants and them at bay, productive and generous. And so women look for markers of social status to index attractiveness. Why? Because they outsource the problem of who's the better man to the men, and they let them compete, and they peel from the top. And it's a brilliant strategy. So why do women reject men? Well, I just told you why. And so that might be very irritating if you're rejected. It is very irritating. There's probably nothing worse in a sense, but like how in the world could it be any different? Because the stakes are high. So women are more sensitive to negative emotion, and they're more empathic and agreeable. What does that mean? Why is that? Well, we talked about some of the reasons. Why else? Because they have to care for dependent infants. So here's the rule for caring for an infant up to about 7 months old. Whatever the infant wants goes, right? An infant in distress is never wrong. Now, you can't say that about a creature of any other age, right? Once children are capable of moving, crawling even, they're not entirely dependent, and every single demand for gratification they make manifest does not have to be met with immediate, what would you say? Does not have to be addressed immediately at the cost of everything. It's not the case with infants 6 months and lower. Whatever they need and want now, that's what's to be provided, right? And so women are tilted towards that kind of care. Okay, what does that mean in the biblical context? Adam's role is to name and subdue, to establish order. What's the problem with establishing order? You might leave something out. Women are the voice of that which has been left out. Well, what does that mean? Well, you know what it means. If you've had a family, if you're in a marriage, women bring the attention of men to the concerns of the vulnerable. And you know, if you have a family and you have 2 kids and then you have a 3rd baby, the family's already settled into a kind of stable order, let's say. But now you have this new infant, and it's a completely new creature, and it's got a new temperament. God only knows what it's up to. It's an extremely complicated creature, and there has to be adjustments made to the structure of order so that that child can find its place. And the women are in contact with that, and their emotional makeup and perceptual structure, they're better at decoding nonverbal behavior, for example, than men are. That enables them to speak for the marginalized. Right. That accounts in large part for the political divide between men and women that you can see growing. What's the sin of women? Amongst the marginalized are the serpentine. Right? Not everybody who cries victim is an infant. Some of the creatures that cry victim are monsters, and you shouldn't clutch them to your breast. That's what Eve does with the snake. She clutches the serpentine to her breast. Why?
100% wrong there. Or no, I might be wrong.
To announce to herself the supreme power of her compassion.
But sadly.
Right. That's the pattern. That's the eternal pattern of female sin as laid out in the second story in the biblical corpus. What's the sin of man? Adam. Because he falls immediately after Eve. Eve hearkens to the voice of the serpent, who is the immediate manifestation of the Luciferian spirit of the usurper and the deceiver. That's the mythological structure. What does that mean? Psychopaths use victim status to gain what they want, right? And prideful, compassionate fools fall for it. Why? To elevate their compassion to the highest place. Not a wise move. What's Adam's sin? What do men want? They want to impress women. I worked with lawyers for years, high-end lawyers, people who ran law firms, who were partners of senior law firms, and they made a lot of money, $1,000 an hour, a lot of money. Why were they interested in the money? Well, there are materialistic reasons for being interested in money. We don't have to cover them. But most of them regarded the money, especially their bonuses, as, what did they say? That's how we keep score. What did that mean? Well, that was how the men rank ordered themselves in the status hierarchy within the firms, and that's very common among men. They're rank ordering status all the time. Why? Because women peel from the top. The biggest predictor of a woman's attractiveness to a man's attractiveness to a woman cross-culturally is his comparative status among other men. It's a walloping predictor. It's by far the biggest contributor. And we said, why? Well, why? Well, because a woman doesn't need another infant, right? She needs someone who can help. And how does she find out? Well, she sees who wins the contest among men, and she assumes that the winner is the winner. And so why not have him? And it's a perfectly reasonable way of conducting an analysis. It can be gamed. But that's a different story. So what's Adam's sin? He tries to impress Eve. So when she comes to him announcing her new relationship with the serpentine, he says, no problem, dear, whatever you want, and fails to establish the proper borders of order. What happens? That's the fall of mankind. Okay, so what does that mean? It's a very complicated idea. There's a Christian idea, deep Christian idea, that suffering is the consequence of sin, and that the worst sin, let's say, is the sin of pride. Adam and Eve both fall prey to the sin of pride, in the feminine way and the masculine way. Adam says, I got this, baby. And Eve says, we can even clutch the serpent to our breasts. Right. That's their typical forms of pathology. What happens to people who bite off more than they can chew? What happens to people who attempt to incorporate and digest the inedible? They fall. That's what happens to Adam and Eve. Pride comes before a fall. Okay, so what does that have to do with suffering? That's a complicated question, right? Because you might think, and rightly so, that suffering itself seems to be built into the structure of the world, right? I mean, we're fragile. We can be hurt. Our children are hurt. They stumble. They scrape their knees. They break their arms and legs. They develop terrible diseases like we all do. There seems to be an element of suffering and vulnerability built into the world. What else causes suffering? Biting off more than you can chew, right? So you imagine how many times you're struggling forward in disenchanted misery because you've fallen away from what you should pursue, because you've falsely aggrandized yourself or taken on a task, claimed to be able to take on a task or to have a skill that you don't possess, setting yourself up for a fall. What's the consequence of that? Misery. How much of the misery of the world is that? That's a real interesting question. We actually don't know, right? We've established, let's say in the course of this dialogue, that there's a certain amount of suffering that's a mere consequence of the structure of the world, the arbitrary nature of reality, the sort of random distribution of vulnerability and illness. But by the same token, man, you can do a lot of stupid things to make your life worse. And so you got to ask yourself, if you stop doing those stupid things and you aimed in the proper direction, how much of the suffering that's attendant on life would vanish? And the answer is, well, quite a lot, because you know that when you're doing your best, when you have your act together, when you're not pridefully overreaching, when you're not overextending yourself, when you're not acting falsely, when you're not trying to usurp and claim what's not yours, when you're not trying to be the pinnacle of the moral order, let's say, life's a lot better. And then it's an open question. Well, how much better would it be if you were really good at that? And then there's another question, which would be, how much better would life be in total if everyone was doing that? Right? If everyone was walking with God in the garden instead of taking to themselves the right to define the moral order? How much suffering would vanish? All of it? It's hard for me to see how all suffering could vanish given our mortal constraints, but you can sure take a bad situation and make it worse with stupidity. So the Christian insistence that suffering enters the world with sin, maybe it's more the suffering that makes the world unbearable enters the world with sin, right? Because there's nothing more effortful than the work you have to do to dig yourself out of the hole that you dug and fell in. And you see, this is sort of what happens to Adam and Eve in the immediate aftermath of the fall, because God tells Eve that she's going to suffer in life. She's going to suffer in consequence of her children's dependence on her and her role as the primary contributor to reproduction, and she's going to suffer under the dominion of her husband. Why? Well, they're both fallen creatures. Why would women suffer under the dominion of their husbands? This isn't something God says should happen, right? It's not a definition of the moral order. It's a definition of the fallen moral order. Women are attracted to high-status men. The degree to which a woman is attracted to a man is proportionate to his comparative status. Women are attracted to men whose status exceeds their own. What's the implication of that? they're going to be under the dominion of their husband. If the husband is fallen, then they're going to be under the dominion of his tyranny, right? So that's the definition of the fallen world for women. What's the definition of the fallen world for men? Well, God says, you're going to have to toil in the fields, and it will bring forth thorns and thistles. You'll make your way forward effortfully, and you'll return to the dust from which you emerged. When is work toilsome and effortful? It's particularly toilsome and effortful when you're digging yourself out of the hole that you dug and fell in. Well, you can understand this. You know, there are times in your life where you're putting a lot of effort into something. It's not exactly work, right? You're highly motivated to do it. Well, why? Because it called to you, because you're certain that you're engaging in that you're aiming at something that is morally valid, let's say, that your conscience isn't going to upbraid you for, that's intrinsically interesting, right? If you're engaged in work that isn't the result of sin, so to speak, then is it toil or is it play? And you could ask yourself, you know, when your life is optimized and you're doing something that is in the nature of your true calling, when you're walking with God in the garden, when you've reestablished that relationship, then the sacrifices that you have to make to move forward aren't painful. And you understand that because you can see that at the best moments of your life, you work, but in harmony with things, and not in contradiction to them. And that working in harmony, there's a tremendous pleasure in that. You know, children's play is effortful. If they're really playing hard, they're on the edge of their developmental ability, right? They're stretching themselves. But there's nothing about that isn't joyful. And so there's an insistence, an implicit insistence in the story of Adam and Eve that work aimed properly would be play, and play in the eternal garden. And so one of the things you might want to ask yourself is that if your toil is not play, how wrong is your aim? And then the next question is, well, what should you aim for? All right. The biblical library does what it can to answer that question too. What should you aim for? God is characterized in the biblical stories as the source of the ultimate aim. That's a good way of thinking about it. So imagine that there are things in your life that interest you and compel you and pull you forward. They call to you. Now imagine that as you mature, what interests and calls to you and pulls you forward changes, right? But the fact that something interests you and calls to you and motivates your transformation, that doesn't change. God is defined in the Old Testament corpus as the spirit behind all transformational aims, right? So you can imagine that the thing that beckons to you and calls you to develop and mature further varies in its specific manifestations depending on your time and your place and your temperament, but that there's something behind that that shines through all of those things that beckon and call and fill you with enthusiasm. And that's the deity at the pinnacle of Jacob's ladder, which is the never-ending spiral of upward aim. That's a definition. And that people are called upon to exist in relationship to that spirit. That's the covenant between man and God. How's that spirit characterized? In Genesis, God, the source of ultimate aim, or the target of ultimate aim, is characterized as the spirit that broods upon the primeval water. That's the opening part of Genesis. What does that mean? Well, there's no water yet in creation. That comes later. What's the water? The Hebrew is tohu vabohu, and it doesn't exactly mean water. It means something like potential or possibility or chaos. God is the spirit that extracts the habitable order that is good out of a pre-existent potential or chaos. And human beings are made in that image. What does that mean? This is what you do in your life. What do you perceive when you wake up in the morning? Well, you think, well, I perceive my bed, I perceive my carpet, I perceive my curtains. That just shows how materialistic you are in your conceptualizations, because that's not what you perceive. What you perceive is the possibility that's making itself available to you for the day, right? Think about how you wake up. Well, first of all, you're asleep, you're unconscious, there's nothing happening then. Poof, daylight, you're awake. You're awake. And what are you contending with? Maybe you're terrified. Why? You're terrified by all the potential left over that you haven't realized because you've been offering inappropriate sacrifices at your job. That's what that means. Or maybe you wake up enthusiastic and optimistic, and you can see that there's many things that exist in possibility for you that you could wrestle into the order that's good, right? And so then you can leap out of bed enthusiastically and begin to what? Subdue and order the world, right? And that's the nature of consciousness itself. Like consciousness itself, which is being as far as human beings are concerned, because what is non-conscious being? It's the spirit that grapples with the possibility of the world. Is the possibility real? Well, can you do one thing or another? Can you do one thing or 5 other things? Do you have choice? Well, you treat everybody like they have choice. You treat people like they have responsible choice. You assume that on your own account. It appears to you that you have that ability to go this way or that way. In what? In the realm of potential. Well, that's why human beings are made in the image of God. Well, that's why that's an accurate representation, is we're doing the same thing at the local level that the spirit that gives rise to everything is deemed to have done at the beginning of time and to be continually doing. Right, we have something to do. What? Transform possibility into actuality. In what manner? How about in the manner that aims up? We're transforming chaotic potential with our aim to what? To establish the kingdom of heaven. Or what? Its alternative? Hell. We've done that plenty, especially in the 20th century, by aiming down, by lying, by being prideful, by being usurpers of the moral order. That's a communist ideologue in a nutshell. And what do they produce with their downward aiming, wrestling with potential? Hell. Is it real? Wait till you get there and you'll find out. And maybe you've had a few side trips already, right? It's as real as pain and suffering. It's as real as pointless pain and suffering, right? It's as real as self-inflicted pointless pain and suffering. Or maybe it's as real as the pointless pain and suffering that you inflict with your carelessness and your deception and your pride, even on the people you love. That's a good definition of hell. Is that real? You can just ask yourself that question. Everybody knows the answer to that question. Is the alternative real, the upward aim? All of the great heroes of the New Old Testament, they sacrifice themselves to the good. That's what they're doing when they're building altars. So I want to tell you that story because this is very useful to know. I said the entire biblical library is an investigation into sacrifice. This really becomes clear in the story of Cain and Abel. Now, Adam and Eve are fated to work. Okay, so let's make an equation here so that everybody understands what's going on. There's no difference between work and sacrifice. So that's a key to understanding the biblical text. Why? Well, what the hell do you think you're doing when you're working? You're sacrificing the present to the future, or you're sacrificing your immediate wants to the community. It's a sacrificial gesture, right? Work. It's the definition of work. You're giving up something now. You're offering something now to what? To stabilize the community in the future, including your future self. It's a sacrificial gesture. Work is sacrifice. Okay, so once you know that, you can understand, let's say, the story of Cain and Abel, which is the story that I'll close with. Cain and Abel are the first two human beings in the fallen world, so in the actual world, in the world of history, in the world we occupy. They're born and not made by God. And they represent two patterns of sacrifice. The two patterns of sacrifice that characterize culture and psyche, individual and community. The fundamental patterns, just like Adam and Eve are the fundamental patterns of masculinity and femininity, Cain and Abel, the hostile brothers, are the twin patterns of sacrifice or work that characterize the human approach to reality. Abel, who's Abel? Abel aims up. He makes the sacrifices that are of the highest quality. Abel is a herder, and he takes the best animals, and he butchers them, and he takes the best cut, and he takes the best pieces of that, and he immolates it on an altar because he wants to dramatize, because that's what he's doing, playing out the idea that the best is what will satisfy the spirit of the cosmic order. Do you believe that? Well, you either believe that or the opposite. Like, those are your options. There's a no non-belief option here. You believe one thing or another. If you offer your best, will you be accepted? Because that's God's pronouncement to Cain. Cain takes the opposite stance. He offers what's second best. And doesn't work. Well, is that true? Well, how often have you offered anything but your best and had it work? And then you might think, well, why would you even think it could work? Because life is very difficult. It's very difficult. And if you're going to make a success out of it, or something that isn't an absolute hell, it's fairly probable that you're going to have to bring your best to the table. Because, like, you think, who do you think you are? You think you're the sort of person who can defy the structure of reality itself? That you can fool yourself and other people and the natural order and God by offering what's second rate and succeeding. That's your theory. That's not a wise theory. Not in the face of the difficulties of life. That's Cain's theory. That's what he tries to do. And what happens to him? It says in the text, his countenance falls. What does that mean? He's bitter, resentful, miserable, unhappy, and vengeful. Well, why? Well, because he's being rejected. Well, why is he being rejected? Because he's not bringing his best to the table. And so what does Cain do? Well, he doesn't do what Abel does. Abel always aims up, right? He makes the sacrifices that are acceptable to God. That's his story, because he brings what's of the highest quality to the table. Cain doesn't. Cain fails, is bitter, miserable, and resentful. And what does he do? Well, he doesn't admit it, because he's not able. He calls out God. And so he has a little chat with God, just like we all do when we're bitter and failing. How did you make this world where I'm breaking myself in half, and all that's happening is I'm failing? And my brother, Abel, the sun shines on him. Everything he does touches to gold. What the hell's wrong with the moral order? What's wrong with the spirit who created existence itself? That's Cain's challenge to God. It's a hell of a thing to think about failure as a consequence of second-rate effort. It's like, well, I'm failing because God made the world wrong. There isn't a more prideful presumption than that. And it doesn't really work on God. And God says to Cain, if you did well, you'd be accepted. And what does that mean? It means if you brought absolutely everything you had to bear on the circumstances at hand, and you left nothing behind, if you were willing to sacrifice everything necessary, you could have what you needed and wanted. But nothing short of that will suffice. Right? That's why it's this is why Christ in the Gospels calls upon his followers to abandon even their brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers if they're going to walk uphill. This is why Abraham is called upon to sacrifice Isaac to God. It's like everything is to be sacrificed to the upward aim. And that's what God insists upon. And he's characterized as the spirit that makes that insistence. And we're characterized in relationship to that spirit. And God says something else, which doesn't make Cain the least bit happy. Cain believes that the reason he's bitter and resentful, miserable and vengeful, and cursing God and shaking his fist at the sky in this prideful manner is because he's failing. And God says, that's not why you're miserable, buddy. There's an intervening variable you're not, he doesn't say that because God's not a scientist. There's an intervening variable you're not taking into account. What does he say to Cain? He said, sin crouches at your door like a sexually aroused predatory animal, and you invited it in to have its way with you. And so what does that mean? It's brilliant. It's so condensed. It's so brilliant. It's the most accurate bit of psychology of resentment I've ever seen. What does it mean? You fail. Okay. The causal consequence, you're bitter. Well, no, one of the causal consequences could be you could wake the hell up and start doing better and repent and confess and get your act together and atone and move on, right, and learn. That's causal too. You can't blame your resentment, misery on your suffering. There's an intervening spirit. What's that? The spirit of sin that crouches at your door. A predator, a sexually aroused predator. Why that? Well, because it wants to f you. I'm dead serious about that. It's a very ancient metaphor, that metaphor of, what would you say, the seminal quality of evil. What's evil? It's something you invite in, right? It's something that you creatively engage with. That's the sexual metaphor. It's something you brood on. It's something you allow to inhabit you. It's something that possesses you. The terrible people who do terrible things, the people who shoot up high schools, it's like 2,000 hours of fantasizing before they pull the trigger. And what's that a result of? Bitterness and resentment. But that's not all. It's the invitation of something in to take possession of them. And so that's what God accuses Cain of. And that makes him extremely unhappy, as you might imagine. You're miserable because you're not making the right sacrifices. You're resentful because you all invited in the spirit of sin itself. It's all to be laid at your feet. The last thing Cain wants to hear. The most corrective possible piece of advice, which he instantly rejects. What does he do? He kills Abel. What does it mean? If you're resentful enough and you're vengeful enough, you'll destroy your own ideal. Right? You'll destroy everything. Why? To obtain revenge on the source of your suffering, right? To foment bloody rebellion against God. That's what Cain does. That's what the spirit of bitterness forever does. Cain makes the wrong sacrifices. He sacrifices the ideal itself to his own pride. And then he tells God, my sin is greater than I can bear. Well, why? Destroy your ideal as a consequence of bitterness? You've got nowhere to go. Cain is destined to wander the land of Nod. Where's that? That's where children go when they're asleep. Sin badly enough, you'll take escape in unconsciousness. Why does Cain wander? Because he's a bitter psychopath and no one wants to be near him. And so he takes the pathway of the itinerant vagrant who's so pathological in his orientation that anyone decent will step away from him. What's the consequence of Cain's failure to sacrifice? His descendants are worse. His descendants are the first worshippers of technology. They're the first vengeful, tit-for-tat, genocidal agents. Lamech, one of Cain's descendants, says, you kill Cain and you offend Cain and you die. You offend me, 7 or 70 die. What does it mean? The pattern of resentful bitterness that characterizes Cain can make itself manifest in the broader community and turn everything into a genocidal nightmare, right? What follows? The flood, right? The flood that washes away Cain's descendants, right? Sacrifice, that's the essence of adaptation. That's the essence of maturation. It's the fundament upon which the community is predicated. I'll end with this. For 2,000 years, we put a symbol at the center of our culture, right? Insofar as our culture is a Christian. And by the center, I mean literally the center. The cathedral at the center of the town or city, the altar at the center of the cathedral, the crucifix at the center of the altar. Why? Because it's a symbol of the ultimate sacrifice, right? The full sacrifice of self in service of future, others, community, and God. Is that the principle upon which the community is founded? The principle upon which the community is founded is sacrifice. What's the ultimate sacrifice? Well, it's the sacrifice of everything to what's good, right? That's the fundamental story of a Judeo-Christian culture. Is it true? Try making your life, try walking through your life successfully without making the proper sacrifices upward and find out whether or not it's true. All right, everyone. Thank you very much.
It was a good talk, I must say. So still, the story of Adam and Eve, now I have some questions. I think Eve's sin is actually much more sinister than them taunting her motherly instincts and thinking she's so great that she can cradle the snake. Sadly, I think something much worse. But man cannot tolerate it because of how sinister it is. So the doctor might be ignoring it or changing it for something much more benign and... Jesus, this guy really taunted me.
Yeah, well, it's an important coda that you mentioned there, that it wasn't only rates of self-reported depression and anxiety, right? Because I know there was a criticism directed at your work by a psychiatrist who pointed out or claimed that the self-report data might be unreliable. For example, people can exaggerate their symptomatology. They can be trained to do that. They can do that to attract attention to themselves. There can be competition for psychopathology. That's part of the structure of a contagious psychological epidemic. But you pointed out, quite rightly, I thought, that you saw the same data in episodes of self-harm, particularly among young women, which is a much more direct behavioral measure of that proclivity for negative emotion. And I should point out clinically, just for those who are watching and listening, that anxiety is a response to the threat of destruction, psychological or physical. Depression is more of a pain response, and it's got two aspects. It's heightening of negative emotion, withdrawal in particular, that causes cessation of activity, but also decrease in positive emotion, which is more associated with demoralization and lack of motivational impetus to move forward. And those are, you describe those as the internalizing disorders. That's not the same as the fragmentation that goes along with psychosis, or manic depressive disorder for that matter. This is quite a particularized, let's say, epidemic. And so, okay, so you laid out the data that this is occurring, and you noted that it was happening cross-culturally, so it wasn't something specific, let's say, to the United States. What drove you to the conclusion, or even to investigate the possibility, that this had something to do with technology generally and with social media more particularly?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so Jean Twenge was really the first person to call attention to this. Jean Twenge has been studying generations for 20 years, and she had an article in The Atlantic in 2017 where The Atlantic chose the title, "Have Smartphones Destroyed a Generation?" And so Jean laid out the evidence. It was all correlational, which doesn't prove it, but the patterns are so consistent. There's a correlation in time, which is when this new technology is introduced. Around 2012 is basically, so to back up, in 2010, teenagers almost all have a flip phone or a basic phone. The iPhone exists, but it's not very common. The front-facing camera comes out on the iPhone 4 in 2010. Instagram becomes super popular in 2012. So that's the period where teen social life is changing radically from using a phone to call your friend saying, hey, let's get together this afternoon, to spending all day swiping and scrolling and commenting and posting. 2010 to 2015 is the great rewiring of childhood. And the reason why we think that that is the major cause is because first, when we look at the historical pattern, it's a correlation. Lots of things happen in 2012. We can't prove that, oh, they get on social media, instantly the girls get depressed. That could be a coincidence. But because it happened the same way in so many countries, no one else has come up with an alternate theory. No one else has said, yeah, but here's something else that happened in all these countries that would plausibly make girls, and especially preteen girls, this is important. The increases we're talking about are generally between 50 and 100% increases in these measures of psychopathology. For preteen girls, you sometimes get 200% increases. And for self-harm, 10 to 14-year-old girls did not used to cut themselves. It's very, very rare before 2012. There you get over 200% increase in hospitalization for self-harm. So the historical correlation, it doesn't prove it, but there's no other alternative. And then you have the correlation in time use. That is, the people who are heavy users of social media in almost every study are doing much worse. And then you have experiments where when you get people off of social media for a couple of weeks, only if it's more than a week, this is important. Some studies make someone get off social media for a day or two. And if you're addicted to something and you're deprived of it for a day or two, you're not happier, you have withdrawal. But when it goes longer than a week, the vast majority of those studies find that people actually feel less anxious, they feel better. So a variety of kinds of evidence were coming in by the late 2010s, and this is all before COVID, coming in that it sure looks like it's the move onto smartphones with social media.
Okay, so let me ask you some clinically relevant questions, if you don't mind, especially about the preteen issue and the issue with girls. So when you say preteen, what age exactly are you speaking of?
So the CDC happens to break up data 10 to 14 and then 15 to, I think, 19. So we have, we could probably dig into it and go find a resolution, but that's what they provide. So I'm specifically giving you numbers for the 10 to 14-year-olds. I would consider preteen generally 10 to 13, let's say. At 13 is when you're supposed to be able to start using these things, at least according to the law. Now, nobody pays attention to that. The age of first social media goes down and down and down. For TikTok, it's now around age 8. Instagram, I think, is around 9. Instagram's around 9 or 10. So it is normal. It is widespread. It is probably a majority of 12-year-olds who are already on at least one social media platform.
Greer and Catherine, their 4-year-old son, was diagnosed with a degenerative iron.
Talking about. Okay, so you're talking about really early adolescence on the female side. Okay, so let me lay out some propositions and tell me if they're in accord with what you're observing. So it's been known for 300 years, 400 years, that young women are more prone to social contagions. There's a great book called The History of the Unconscious by Henri Onberger, and he traces the history of psychoanalytic thought way back before Mesmer and documents the hysteria, so to speak, which was the Freudian version of social contagion, literally back, it's 300 years. So it's very well documented. It's a great book, by the way, very useful for the sort of thing that you're investigating. And then the question might be why. So I'm going to lay out some hypotheses, and you tell me what you think. So the first is girls tilt more heavily towards negative emotion in general, and they're more agreeable by temperament, which means that it may mean that consensus is more important to them, like social consensus, but also that they experience a given unit of threat or pain with more emotional intensity. And that really seems to kick in about the same time puberty kicks in. Now, there's various reasons for that. Women are more susceptible, you might say, particularly at puberty, sexually and physically. And then you could also make a case that their nervous systems are wired for the protection of infants rather than for their own optimal social functioning. I think that's a reasonable hypothesis. In any case, it's well documented across the world that differences in negative emotion and agreeableness seem to emerge in early at puberty, and then they're permanent. Okay, so then the next issue might be, when women experience negative emotions, particularly of the self-conscious kind, and self-consciousness, as you point out in your book, is associated with suffering, that tends to take the form of bodily preoccupation. And the hypothetical reason for that is that women are judged more harshly in consequence of their physical appearance by men, arguably, but even more intensely by other women. And then the final kicker might be that the forms of social interaction that women appear to prefer, girls, online, are short form and heavily image related. And so, you talk about the front-facing camera. God only knows what that technological innovation alone. And then you can imagine one final thing, which is, it's one thing to compete for social priority on the basis of your appearance, all things considered, with a small, close group of peers. It's another thing to compete with the whole bloody world in terms of maximal attractiveness. And then there's the final issue, we might say, is that the internet never forgets. And that's a big problem, too. So I'm wondering what you think of those potential contributing factors. Well, and also, finally, girls hit puberty earlier than boys, so they have to contend with the complexity of the introduction of the sexual, let's say, at an age where they have less experience than boys do when they encounter puberty. So anyways, those are some of the potential contributors, as far as I'm concerned, to the differential susceptibility.
I think every one that you mentioned is plausible. The way I approach it in the book, and again, I'm coming from social psychology, I think we'll end up in the same place. And especially, I want to especially flag the social contagion. That's really powerful, really important. The way that I approach it is drawing from, say, Simon Baron-Cohen's work on autism. And so we all start off as girls in utero. And if there's a Y chromosome, you get a little testosterone. It changes the body over to the male pattern, changes the brain over to the male pattern on average. And the male brain becomes a little less about empathizing, a little less socially connected, and a little more about systemizing. And this is the biggest difference the biggest gender difference in interest is things versus people. Girls and women are just more interested in people. They want to know. They have a more elaborate mental map. They are interested in who said what about whom and how did she know that he thought that, whereas guys are just much more clueless about that. Guys are shifted over a little bit on the spectrum towards autism. And that is going to help us explain the boys' story, because that's going to be more about video games and all sorts of other things. It's not as much about social media. But the girls' story focuses very much on social media. Now, why is the curve so sharp for girls? You almost never get such sharp curves in mental illness data. And I think this is because, as you said, girls have long been more prone, teenage girls have long been more prone to social contagion. And I review a study from the 90s, a historical study. There are two different kinds of social contagions. There are those that involve motor behavior, like tics, and also dancing fevers, where people in the Middle Ages would dance for days and sometimes die of exhaustion. So there are some that are motor, and there are some that are more anxiety related and maybe fainting. And so girls are more subject to both of those kinds of social contagion. And so I think the reason why it's so sharp for girls, and especially self-harm, is that is a very particular behavior that very few people would think of doing on their own. But when you super connect all the girls in 2012, because they all get on Instagram, or not all, most get on Instagram right around 2012, 2013, suddenly you have these pools, these discussion groups, these places where girls are sharing their anxiety, and the more extreme your suffering, the more extreme your anxiety, the more support you get. So they're incentivizing each other to be more and more extreme, and some girls are self-harming. And while has not been so rare for older teens, it used to be extremely rare for 10, 11, 12-year-old girls. They didn't used to help themselves. So I think many of the things you said, the greater susceptibility to negative emotion, which especially comes out at puberty, hormonal changes change so much about boys and girls. The greater social connectedness, so that girls are just much more affected by what they see, the desire for approval in the eyes of others, and all of the things you said about being judged by social appearance. There's even a quote, I think it's in Marcus Aurelius, about what a shame it is that girls are just judged for their beauty, their sexual potential, something like that. Right at puberty, girls become objects in the way, and we haven't even mentioned porn. So many, the premature sexualization of kids. So for all these reasons, I think it's been tougher on girls. Now, to be clear, we'll get to the boy story soon, I hope. To be clear, if we check in on kids at 14, the girls are doing worse. There's no doubt about that. Their measures of anxiety and depression, self-harm are worse. Now, boys' suicide rates are much higher. That's a different story. Boys' suicide rates are much higher. But the percentage increase in suicide is often a little bigger in girls than boys. So they're both going up. The boys seem to be doing better at 14 because they're spending huge amounts of time on video games and porn, and that's really fun. They're enjoying that. Now they're lonely because they don't have friends the way, you know, when you and I were kids, we had a gang of friends. But they don't seem to be doing as